So, you guys know how I did a video on the Night Stalker? Well, the Night Stalker actually had something very similar to what the Bofors 40mm had. And the Night Stalker, because of its size and its shape, was actually able to hold one cannon under each sensory eye. And remember, it only had two frontal sensory eyes, allowing it to strike like a predator in the night. And that is why its eyes would glow, so that way it could actually use its power to guide the shells into enemy fortresses or battleships. And the Night Stalker was actually able to use its ability to, use its 40mm cannons to hit other bombers straight up and close. These were hypervelocity rounds, which allowed the Night Stalker to actually hit planes from afar. This was a heavy fighter, so it was kind of big. It wasn't like SR-71 Blackbird big, but it was still pretty darn big and was a terrifying craft. And it was extremely fast, it was extremely maneuverable, and, it would pummel the enemy bomber groups from afar with its main cannons, and then as it would fly through them to come around for another frontal attack, it would launch its explosive ordinances from its 10,000 eyes, and would, take down 3 or 4 bombers each, as it, flew its way through the groups. Fighter crafts would be knocked out of the air, bomber craft would be knocked out of the way, heavy bombers would be knocked out of the air. This aircraft was on the realm of supernatural by what it was able to do. And it would come around for more strafing runs with its 2 frontal cannons and hit, them, in the cockpits. It would, place well-placed hits on the bomb bays, causing planes to blow up in mid-air. It was said that because of the capabilities of this craft, it could take out entire battle groups with ease. And in fact, it was actually able to even cause trouble doing high-speed runs against enemy fleets or ground fortifications because of its frontal cannons. And if it didn't have any aerial targets to attack, it would fly very low, and it would pretty much do miniature bombing runs by launching its explosives from its 10,000 eyes onto enemies. So it would, destroy infantry, it would destroy light tanks. I mean, there's lots of stuff that it could do. And there was actually times where, it would, do a barrel roll as quickly as possible and fling all 10,000 rounds, 10,000 shots out at the same time. And these explosive rounds would just blanket a large area of land with these hyper explosive rounds. Like, these things would be like a big bomb each hitting the enemy. Like, these things were terrifying. And this was, experimental explosives that Arsenal X was working on. And that's one of the things that made, the Night Stalker just a murderous and terrifying plane. But today, I want to be telling you guys about another new craft that Arsenal X had during World War II, and that they started construction on around World War I, but they kept updating it because their technology would update really quick. There was actually another variant of heavy aircraft that Arsenal X would use, which would be similar to the modern-day AC-130 Hercules gunship. Arsenal X found a way to completely line a plane with obscene amounts of cannons, and what would happen is that it would fly fast and orbit around enemy ships, bombing them from up above, with hypervelocity rounds completely devastating them from up above. It was actually said that some of the Japanese and German strike groups were devastated before they could get to their areas because of the heavy gunship hitting them from up above. Because this craft used internal propulsion and specialized early versions of the energy crystal engines to propel it forward, it would mean that its engines could be super heavily armored and could take a unimaginable amount of punishment. This was a very big plane. Arsenal X would call this the HyperThunder. It was said that the HyperThunder was one of the very first ever hyperclass vehicles of Arsenal X. This was toward the end of the war, where Arsenal X finally decided to stop being nice and start fighting dirty and fighting to kill. Arsenal X pretty much had enough of people's BS and was like, fine, we tried being nice. We tried stopping people from attacking each other. Screw you guys, we're going to make sure that you can't get up ever again. So Arsenal X pretty much they decided to stop being the meek and mild individuals that they were, who had advanced technology to try to keep people from attacking each other as deterrence. And they were like, fine, we're going to use our military might and obliterate you so you can never recover again. And pretty much Arsenal X, this was, like I said, the dark age of the wartime, where Arsenal X had to retreat from being public and had to pretty much go into the shadows. Hence why the Night Stalker was, one of the most evil and terrifying things that they have ever created. It was actually rumored that an enemy fleet was trying to attack one of the HyperThunders while it was still on the runway, and because the plane was so heavily armored, and because they were able to put up defensive barriers in front of it, the plane was able to actually fire its cannons upward and hit the enemy with specially guided projectiles from a very early version of a satellite to hit the enemy. Because these were hypervelocity, specially engineered projectiles, this terrifying beast could fire its cannons at around 30 miles away, as the projectiles would have an ability to generate self-lift once calibrated. Usually these were brawler kind of aircraft, made to fight close and fight heavy and long battles. And these crafts had the ability to fly heavily damaged as well. Like the A-10 Warthog, these heavy kind of assault craft were capable of, looking like they would fall apart and still be able to fly. It was actually said that this craft could smack itself into other bomber groups and knock them out of the air because of the heavy armor that protected it. If the plane ran out of ammunition, but there were still enemies in the air, it would use its massive bulk to get up to speed and smack the enemy out of the air. There was times where this horrifying whale of a plane, it was kind of the size of like a very angry whale, like a very pissed off whale, and it would use its massive bulk and slam itself on top of enemy planes, snapping off the wings. Because remember, during World War II, a lot of planes had armor plating, but were primarily made out of wood. So they couldn't take too much force against them, or else they'd snap off and fall out of the air. When all the cannons on one or both sides were firing, all you can hear is thunder. The plane lights up like lightning itself, and the shots leave each cannon at around 4,000 feet per second. This was when Arsenal X was experimenting with special anti-recoil systems. They worked beautifully and perfectly. This aerial battleship was capable of devastating anything and everything that it came across, and because of the specialized, flexible armor and design of the aircraft, it was able to actually take the recoil of its cannons very easily. These were about 50mm round shells that it would fire, and it took about 3 to 4 men each to take care of each pair of cannons. It is said that these things could fire 2 times every second, and that would lead to staggering fire upon the enemy. They had a very special belt-fed system that led into these cannons, so you could have continual fire, you could detach the belt from damaged guns and put them on the ones that are working. I mean, the customizability and the survivability of the craft was, unimaginable by World War II standards. Like, this plane was capable of pretty much handling anything that came against it. This was a war machine that the Germans would have adored to have in their arsenal. They would literally be worn down by heavy explosive shells, and you could watch the ships literally melt in front of you. Or tanks. Like, this thing could attack tanks, this thing could attack heavy fortifications. It was scary. Sometimes this plane would activate its specialized booster drive that would allow it to fly into enemy bomber groups and pummel them from both sides because of its shells. It was said that a single HyperThunder could take out entire squadron or battle groups of enemies. All this thing would have to do is, strafe the enemy bomber squadrons before they could scatter, and you would just see planes erupt into flame. Fighters would be torn to shreds, bomber craft would be exploded. Anything that was flying could be devastated. The HyperThunder had one terrifying hull-mounted cannon that spanned half the craft's length. It was capable of firing approximately 10 rounds before needing to be reloaded. Ammunition was very minimal for it because of its power and because of the size of the shells. These shells could actually eat into an enemy with 3-foot thick armor or slam into enemy fortifications, and you could watch them implode with the force of the explosion. One of the really cool things about these giant shells that were used for the hull-mounted cannon is that they would cause a thing called spalling, where the impact would break the internal armor, causing fragments of armor to shoot around the cabin. So even if, this terrifying ship couldn't get through to you, it would cause massive internal damage without piercing the armor. It's pretty effective. When this cannon fired, it was said to actually cause structural damage to the plane, so they would only be able to fire it as a last resort or if they were about to go on a suicide run. Remember, this was before Arsenal X became the omnipotent force that they are today. They had very real struggles and threats to them, and they had to find ways to quickly knock out the enemy before they could, amass a force. The anti-recoil systems did help, and it allowed the cannon to be able to be fired at a maximum of 10 times before the plane would not be able to take any more shots like that from inside. When the battleship was trying to bombard the HyperThunder was able to unleash a torrent of hypervelocity. Oops, hold on a second. Oh yeah, sorry. But yeah, so this is also when the enemy battle group that sent the battleship and destroyers to attack the plane was trying to bombard the HyperThunder was able to unleash a torrent of hypervelocity deep penetration shells, and within a minute or two, the entire side of the enemy ship was pitted with deep holes in the armor, and internal explosions could be heard. The entire point of this terrifying beast of a plane was just to spread as much death and destruction as quickly and as brutally as possible. Arsenal X did not like its enemies, and because the enemies, weren't playing fair anymore, Arsenal X was like, fine, we won't play fair anymore. We won't play by the Geneva Convention. We won't play by the Treaty of Versailles. We won't play by anything. We're going to play on our own rules, and you're going to have to suck that up or be blown out of the way. This is kind of one of the times where Arsenal X kind of delved into a more unforgiving standpoint. The plane, after devastating the main battleship of the strike group, was able to fly and get off the ground before more enemies came in. Arsenal X was able to hold off the enemy and keep them at bay with their shore batteries until the HyperThunder could take off. Despite the plane being massive and kind of an ugly beast, it was silent because of a specialized internal power drive that had very few moving parts but provided an incredible amount of thrust. This also made it very simple to repair, very simple to fix and run and function. You'd have to be almost next to the plane to actually hear it powering up. Because of the actual power, because of the terrifying power of the engines of the HyperThunder, it could actually fly vertically up and keep itself going up. That is like how strong its engines were, and that's what it allowed it to be extremely maneuverable. Another fun part is that there was technically a third battleship that was near the size of the Yamato that Arsenal X knew that they had to take out of action as soon as possible. So they launched around 10 giant HyperThunders and went to attack it. When they went to attack it, they were intercepted by a fleet that was trying to stop them from getting to the turtle, or that's what the ship was called. Thousands of anti-aircraft rounds would hit the HyperThunders, but the planes did not falter. The heavy armor composite that was protecting them was permeated with a specialized Graphene X component. This meant that it could self-heal almost instantly, much like a self-sealing fuel tank. It's really, really cool. This allowed them to be able to take shocks of big explosions pretty effectively. Under normal propulsion, this terrifying beast would not be able to fly, so that is one of the reasons why this plane was, terrifying to see in battle. But all records of it were scrapped or kept secret by various world governments on request of Arsenal X. When the planes got close enough, they all tilted and started firing everything they had. They had guns pointing out of both sides and would often swoop down and do strafing runs against the enemy fleet, firing everything they had using both broadsides. Even though these were nothing near battleship cannons, because of the hypervelocity deep penetration capacity of each round, this would make them even more devastating per shot. And it was really, really cool. Superstructures would fail and crumble, turrets would explode, ships would be sawn in half as this terrifying beast would ravage the enemy fleet. Very few of these were lost in battle, and usually it would be when they got back home and would crash land at the base because they couldn't lower the gear. They weren't invincible, but they were tough and extremely maneuverable. Because they used smokeless propellant and explosives, you could actually watch the ships get gutted, and it was a very sickening thing because you could watch the ship get torn open like a wild animal tearing into its prey, and it would often make onlookers queasy because they could see this working organism of war just be torn to shreds. No smoke, no explosion, just a forceful well, it's like a force explosion. Like you could watch, pieces of the armor just get ripped open, and you could, it was kind of rough to see. When Arsenal X found this third secret ship, they fired everything they could at it after devastating the enemy fleet, and they all made sure that they only fired when they absolutely had to, so they could conserve ammunition for their main attack. And they were actually able to cripple the enemy fleet pretty quickly with very few shots placed from each ship, from each HyperThunder. This was a really weird and unusual battleship that they found. This one's nickname is called the Turtle, like I told you guys before. The reason why is because this one had extremely thick armor underneath and nearly 2-foot thick armor composite on the top. Its cannons were fixed and had limited movement, but its terrifying battle base was capable of taking on 3 Yamatos and shrugging off nearly every hit. Whoops, lost my place. There we are. This was a very secret battleship that was going to ravage the Allies if it managed to get out. It had a very strange internal propulsion system, making it nearly impossible to cripple. Arsenal X knew that they had to attack, and that they had to attack now. So these 10 massive behemoth, HyperThunder started firing and peppering the enemy with thousands of rounds. Remember, guys, this was the very early stages of them using tiny amounts of hyper-explosive propellant to launch their shells, so they could hold a lot more ordnance and ammunition because of them being able to downsize on the propellant. The sky sounded like continual thunder as these giant planes took turns pummeling this battleship as they were struck by thousands of rounds of AA fire. It was actually said that some of these planes suffered damage because of the heavy fire from the cannons of the ship and from the shore batteries. Arsenal X knew that they could not give up and that they had to knock this thing out of the way or else the Allies would lose the war. It was rumored that the Turtle was able to fire its cannons around 35 miles inland. Arsenal X would have taken the ship over, but they would have had to fight a whole other war in doing so. So the best way that they could knock this thing out was to sink it and salvage it for later. One of the good things about the Turtle is that it wouldn't collapse in on itself, and even if it was sunk, the ship would be very easy to fix and to resurrect. It was specifically built to be as easy to run and as survivable and tough as possible. It was nearly on the lines of what Arsenal X was capable of in their ships during World War II. Arsenal X was very concerned that they knew that an enemy like this had, abilities akin to what they had. So pretty much this was like a evil version of Arsenal X. And if Arsenal X did not stamp out this evil variant, they would, have had, a third world war right after. I mean, this enemy was very close to actually taking over large portions of the world. Much like, the Mongols, earlier in history. It was terrifying because these were very evil leaders, very evil people that were trying to, befriend Hitler and befriend all the other bad people and then take him over. And once they got enough, stuff to make more of these battleships and, more of their planes, these people would have taken over most of Europe. They would have taken over about 75% of the USSR. Like, they would have done a lot of taking over of large swaths of the world. And that would mean that, the rest of the world would follow. So Arsenal X, in this single attack, was able to destroy and assimilate, the people that were about to cause the world to fall into a dystopian future. After hours of continual firing and ammunition running critically low, some of the aerial battleships, seeing that they were not at a critical point of the enemy battleship getting sunk, decided to finally try the kamikaze maneuver. Each one took turns firing its hull-mounted cannon, and that actually did do decent work against the enemy armor. Planes, but unfortunately, because the planes were already pitted with thousands of shells and had damage on to the armor, each firing of the central cannon threatened to shake the planes apart. You could start seeing cracks inside the armored hulls of the plane, and you could actually start hearing its propulsion system start to, break down. So they knew that they were running out of time. This battleship was literally about ready to leave port. And this would pretty much mean that Arsenal X would have to, spend hours and hours taking their planes back, repairing them, and all sorts of trouble. And by that time, that battleship, if it got out to open waters, would be, unstoppable. Arsenal X would have to spend, a couple weeks fixing each plane and, getting it back up and ready to use again. Like, this was pretty much, Arsenal X's last attempt to stop world domination from this enemy. Like, you guys think that the elite that the evil elite is a recent thing, There was actually a very special enemy during World War II that was about ready to do that, even more evil and terrifying than Hitler. It was actually said that, shut up. It was actually said that Hitler was just one of their puppets, one of their pawns, someone to use as a scapegoat. These planes had a special well of directional heavy explosions that was put on the nose, so if they had to crash, they would crash into the enemy and blow it up with something that was on the realm of a miniature nuclear bomb. An explosion of that caliber could wipe out multiple city blocks. So, as they prepared their final runs, the planes would take the remaining ammunition for the hull-mounted cannon and place it in front of the nose-mounted explosives, allowing it to be like a very early version of a multiple explosive warhead. The pilots of the designated planes that were, damaged, were like, all right, buddy, we're going to sign off, and they saluted their teammates before going in and hitting the battleship at around 400 miles an hour. This was like a very angry version of Fort Drum. This was a beast of a battleship. It was capable of taking, entire coastlines single-handedly. A few seconds later, 5 planes hit the enemy battleship, one after another, gouging massive holes in the side of the ship, as each one devastated the armor on the side of the ship. After the 4th plane hit, the plane started to take on water, and its ammunition storages would explode, and it started to sink. The 5th plane, I didn't mention, the 5th plane would strike the superstructure, completely blowing it clean off the ship, killing the captain and the high-ranking officers inside of it. The recoil of the massive explosions knocked out most of the crew and made it so that way the ship was not able to fire back. The ship also was about to run out of ammunition as well, so what was left in its ammunition storages was not much. But it was still effective enough to cause the ship to sink. But considering all the damage that the ship took, it was around 70% intact, which meant that Arsenal X would be able to come back for it later. Arsenal X chose the most damaged planes and rammed them into the ship to take it down. Although Arsenal X lost, 125 men that day, they were able to take out what would have led to hundreds of thousands of deaths as an enemy of epic proportions. And like I said, guys, because they were successful in this attack, they were able to stop a worldwide enemy from taking over. And in fact, they spent the rest of the years after World War II assimilating and exterminating these individuals who were in very high-ranking places, about ready to create a one world system. This enemy would have sided with the Axis, and then would have probably held them hostage after it gained their trust and got enough resources to build more of these battleships. It is actually said that Arsenal X came back later and salvaged the ship and remade it into one of the most powerful ships to this day. Because of the amazing engineering of this ship that they captured and, resurrected, they actually built a lot of their ships off of the designs of this ship, because it was, made to be super easy to use, extremely survivable, and able to be, very modular. That's one of the things that made this ship, terrifying, and why Arsenal X was doing everything they could to knock it out, because Arsenal X knew that, this enemy was hyper advanced. The enemy was assimilated into Arsenal X, and one of the reasons why Arsenal X is the only hyper-advanced military power to this day. And, Arsenal X, does try to find the most reputable countries and give them little snippets of advanced technology that they can use to help fight against, evil people that are trying to take them over. And that's one of the reasons why, the US now gets the SR-71, SR-72. One of the reasons why the US was actually able to be given the SR-71. One of the reasons why Israel now has their iron laser, and one of the reasons why Israel has actually kept their Iron Dome up and running so effectively, because Arsenal X is giving them technology to keep them running. And Arsenal X is everywhere, but it's also nowhere. That's one of the scary things about Arsenal X, is that they are so far ahead of everything else that this world has, that they are capable of doing things far beyond what we can even imagine. But yeah, because of this major defeat and the capture of the capture of a large portion of the evil elite of this enemy faction, they were actually able to track down and either assimilate or exterminate, the powers at hand that were about to bring the world into a dystopian authoritarian future. Now, this wasn't before some of those powers decided to cause a lot of trouble, hence why some of the Cold War was started, hence why the Crimean War was started, hence why there were multiple, genocides from these evil governments. These people have nothing but evil intent in their mind, and all they want is power and to spread as much destruction as possible. Arsenal X knew that after World War II, that their entire purpose was to keep this evil stamped down as much as possible. And that's one of the reasons why Arsenal X still reigns supreme to this day as the most advanced and powerful military force on this planet. And it is actually said that they have a alien invasion plan as well, much like the US. But because Arsenal X is so advanced, they would actually be able to hold off the aliens and give, the world enough time to prepare so that way they could fight. But yeah, so it's very, very cool, and yeah, this is just kind of like another story of how Arsenal X used their ingenuity and brute force tactics to blitzkrieg the enemy into oblivion. And like I said, they pretty much made it so that way up until very recently. New reports from very old documents show of unusual and strange craft from different governments that found, these hidden safes of knowledge. And as mysterious as UFOs are, that is how Arsenal X has been throughout history. And after World War II, all of Arsenal X dropped off the map. You can search with satellites, you can search with search parties, you can check with sensors. You won't find them anywhere. And the scariest part is that your neighbor could be one of Arsenal X. You never know where they are, and you never know where they're going to be. Arsenal X is as mysterious as Stonehenge and as timeless as you can imagine. It was estimated that they were actually started around 1700, and they were actually under a different name. But after World War II, Arsenal X became Arsenal X. Before then, they were, just called the Advanced Coalition of, advanced minds or bright minds working to further humanity. But you can see that is not going to happen. But yeah, it's really, really cool, and just kind of another fun story to show, Arsenal X and their self-sacrificing, mindset to help keep evil at bay for another day. We are many. We are judgment. We are many. We are judgment. We are one. We are Arsenal X.